And we're back once again, only on it's Last Call. Last Call at the Alcohol, only on the lastcallpodcast.com. And joining me here from a draft professors, the draft is now done, but lots going to be talked about. We got to be analyzing picks, talk about the big stories coming out of the draft, and I got to bring a guy who's not afraid to tell you exactly what happened. Damn the board, as they say. Damn what the public says. He's going to give you honest thoughts on the NFL draft and what's going on. I give you Jets prognosticator and draft professor podcast insider. I give you Anthony Russo. So Anthony, let's start off here with the Jets picks because I know you're a Jets fan. Are you
Yes, sir. I,
happy?
I
And we
try to
have
be.
to after seeing all these picks, are you happy with what they did?
You know what, I am, and I was, coming out of day one. I don't think I was as excited as I think most Jets fans were, and I don't want that to sound like I don't like any of these players. I think David Bailey is a fine choice at two, not the one I would have made, but I can, I'm more than okay with it. Uh, Same with King and Sadiq, honestly. Like it was rich, 16 was rich for me, but good player and he'll contribute in the offense. And then I don't mind the trade in for Cooper. My one big question was, and it still is, I'm kind of just wondering how Sadiq and Cooper are gonna work together, like on the field at the same time. I feel like they kind of do similar things, and them and Garrett, like I I like the talent, and if one of them were on the roster, I'd feel really excited about it. But I worry that they might conflict with each other a bit, if that makes sense. D'Angelo Ponce at 50, great pick. No notes. Would have been probably honestly the exact pick I would have made. Um, Daryl Jackson Jr. Fine pick at 103. They needed more beef in the middle. I know they brought in Devondre Sweat, but I think they needed another young body to potentially develop. This was the one pick that made me almost turn the TV off because I thought this was going to be the beginning of the end on day three. It wasn't, thankfully. But trading up for Cade Klubnik, and I say that as someone that had Cade Klubnik as QB1 over last summer. But he had a bad year and just did not look like an NFL quarterback. And listen, if he was a sixth round pick, sure, fine. I don't mind that dart throw. But giving up capital to take him when the next quarterback went like 60 picks later, just felt like a mismanagement of resources at the quarterback position. But they made up for it because honestly, Inez Cooper and VJ Payne were two players that I really liked. And they were picked. Each player was picked honestly about 100 spots after or 100 spots later than I had them on my board. So I loved the value of those players. I think Cooper and Payne are both, if not just good depth pieces to have, even I think potential starters down the line. So overall, if we're giving grades, I would say like B plus to B is probably where I'm at. Solid haul, I think sets up a good foundation for inevitably when the Jets are getting a quarterback in 2027.
So let's start with David Bailey because that's been like the taste great, less filling. I get for the people who are anti or not anti, but just down on Bailey. Like, why is he not the choice for you instead of Arvell Reese? Like, I mean, this is a guy who dominated in the Big 12, 6'4", 245, 250, excellent speed, great pass rush skills. Like, I mean, he is ready right now. So again, if you are wanting a safe thing, and most people want kind of a safe thing, why is Bailey the one everybody's sort of down on, considering, well, he's less of a project?
Yeah, well, so I will say this, and I'm not saying this is why the Jets took him, but this sort of philosophy that like, you know, Aaron Glenn needs to like try to save his job, and so he needs a player that can be more impactful early on. and he can't afford to take a project, like Reese. Um, I think that if that had anything to do with it, and again, I'm not saying it did, but that's not how you operate a draft. You take the player that is going to be best for your football team, for the foreseeable future. You're especially when you're picking at two, you are picking a player that is in with the intent of them being a cornerstone piece of your football team for at least the next decade, ideally. Um, so with that said, again, I don't have like a big problem with taking Bailey. I just think for me, Arvell Reese is certainly needing of development as a pass rusher, but I think what you're going to see now that he's in with the Giants is his quote unquote floor as a linebacker, as an off ball linebacker, is pretty great. Like he and Sonny Styles, I think were just the two best off ball linebackers in this draft. They do different things, obviously, but I think Arvo Reese, like at worst, is a really good linebacker in the NFL. And would you want to take a really good linebacker too? No, but then you're betting on the upside that I think he has as a pass rusher. And people make the Micah Parsons comp. I don't think it's like quite 1-to-1 in that way, but you talk about somebody that has violent, powerful hands, can hold the point of attack so well on the edge, and you hear him talk about it in interviews. Like he didn't really have a pass rush repertoire because that wasn't he's still learning to play the position. So all the success that he had as a pass rusher was primarily just instincts and like feeling it out during the game and trying to figure out what could work and what couldn't. And for a guy doing that, he was pretty successful. So yeah, he certainly needs more grooming and development in that regard, but I think the foundation that you have with him as an overall football player, and especially the Jets too, because the Jets needed linebacker help, and honestly, that was kind of one of the other issues I had with this draft is I don't really think they addressed that. I mean, I guess kind of VJ Payne, but not really. Um, David Bailey's going to come in. I think he's going to be a great to fantastic pass rusher. I think one other issue I'd point out is he is, from a build standpoint, very similar to Will McDonald. Um, and so I do worry that if Bailey can't elevate as a run defender, because that's kind of the big knock with him, we're going to have the two best pass rushers on the team are not going to be able to defend the run consistently. And that's a bit of a concern for me. So yeah, we'll see. Time will tell. I am hopeful for Bailey, but that's kind of why I would have been more comfortable with Reese. I feel like he's all around a better player, and you can do more with him early on as you develop him more.
Take me to Sadiq and Cooper. I mean, you say they're both of them are very similar. Is it still a good thing though? I mean, considering the Jets last year had trouble getting guys open, considering their receiving corp was, yeah, I mean, at worst, and I get it, you want maybe like one guy is more dynamic than the other, but it's still like, all right, they can get open, they can catch the ball, they can actually make it yards after the catch. Is this for, some of those things you're upset about where it's like, well, they're safe, and I'd rather them take more of a swing.
Yeah, so I think, well, I'll start by saying I don't mind. I do not mind the Jets double dipping on pass catcher in the top 50. Um, Again, would I have like taken Sadiq at 16 and then traded back into round one to get another one? Probably not, especially now knowing in hindsight that, Denzel Boston fell, and there were other receivers that I liked on day two, like Jeremy Bernard, and guys like that. So I wouldn't have felt the need to do that. But I'm not, again, like I'm not overly upset that they did that, because I do understand when your when your leading receiver had 400, couldn't even crack 400 receiving yards last year. Um, and the passing offense as a whole was just so anemic and lacking in terms of explosive plays and being able to create after the catch. I understand the thought process to get two of probably the most dynamic players. I mean, Sadiq from an athletic standpoint certainly is one of the most dynamic pass catchers in this draft, and then Omar Cooper is probably the best after the catch player, or at least one of them, in this draft. So, I get the thought process. Again, I want to kind of see how Frank Reich schemes this up, and with Geno Smith, uh, presumably he'll be the starter. I don't know now if Russell Wilson's going to enter that conversation, which is a whole other. We could do a whole podcast about that. But I am, again, I'm optimistic that a receiving core consisting of Garrett Wilson, Omar Cooper Jr., Kenyon Sadiq, Mason Taylor, and Adonai Mitchell can be a pretty young, productive one that can develop. Again, you're building the foundation. You're laying the foundation for whomever is the Jets' first round quarterback in 2027. And honestly, to if you are an Arch Manning or a Dante Moore or whoever it winds up being, you walk into that receiving room, right? Day one, and you have two bookend tackles. That that's a pretty good. And Brees Hall, if he sticks around, that's a really really good young core compared to what very high drafted quarterbacks usually walk into. So I like the thought process there. I do just want to see schematically how it plays out.
Is D'Angelo Pons more than just a nickelback? That's going to be the question for the Jets because it's with the 50th pick overall. You could argue, well, we could really use a boundary cornerback. And look, I get it. Pons was dynamic in college. He's still about 5'9", maybe 5'8", depending on if he's wearing extra thick socks and depending who you view thought was one doing the measurables. So again, I know everybody loves Pons to play, but for the Jets, is he a guy that's more than a nickel corner, or is he somebody that just you look and go, well, he's too damn good as a nickel for us to pass on him at 50?
Yeah, well, I mean, at the very least, I think the Jets think he's an outside corner. Um, I don't think they would have taken. I don't think they would have taken him to play nickel when you have Brownlee that they got from the Titans and Minka that they've said that they kind of intend to play some nickel, or really primarily nickel this season. They they are operating. It seems like that Pons, uh, Brandon Stevens, and Azaria Thomas are going to be kind of the three primary boundary corners. In terms of what if that's a projection I would make, I think if ever there's going to be a corner that has that is 5'9", 170-ish pounds, and is has like 30-inch arms, and is a complete outlier for size. If ever there was a player that could make it work as a boundary corner, I think it's Pons. I think he's the athlete and the has the speed that you would need to compensate, and the instincts that you would need to compensate for all that. I think he's capable. I do worry, one of the, if you weren't a big D'Angelo Pons fan in the draft process, you would probably point to the reps that he had against Jeremiah Smith in the Big Ten title game, where Jeremiah Smith, who is an alien, a freak of nature from a size, speed profile perspective, but Pons had a tough time containing him because he is big and fast and strong. So, he's going to run into receivers that are big, fast, and strong in the NFL. That's usually the calling card for an NFL wide receiver. So, I am hopeful, and I think he has the mental makeup and the skill set to be a very good corner. If he does, it's one of those like, we say a lot of guys should like we let them fail at tackle and then we'll move them to guard. Like that's kind of a thing you'll hear for a lot of offensive linemen. I think it's with him, let him fail at boundary corner and then he can go play and he can play nickel. And I have no doubt that he'd be a very good nickel in this league. When you're taking him pick 50, I don't feel bad that if that's the end result.
All right, I know you, as you said, you were ready to turn off your TV after they announced Cade Klubnik, and again, you were the one pounding the table. Cade Klubnik, number one quarterback in his class early last year in the summer. So again, is it that bad of a pick? I mean, because when you consider that everything went bad in Clemson. I mean, we were talking, if the Chiefs beat writers are going, why the hell did Peter Woods not do as well as we thought? People were, Bills fans going, why didn't T.J. Parker dominate? Like again, is Cade Klubnik the 2024 quarterback or is he the 2025 quarterback? Like, how much goes into that when you are doing this, and grading the Jets pick? Like, all right, well, which Cade Klubnik am I going to see going forward?
Well, and to be fair, I think that's the question you're asking with multiple quarterbacks that were drafted. Is Carson Beck the Carson Beck at Georgia or the Carson Beck at Miami? Remember he was a summer scouting QB1 at one time. Drew Aller was a guy that people were talking about as a possible first rounder if he had a great year this past year, and obviously did not, but he still wound up even going third round. So there is always this question of kind of what player are you getting and what was their own fault versus what was the product of. I mean, you talked about it, Clemson was bad the whole year, and I think prospects across the board on offense and defense suffered because of it. Um, but again, and to your point, I had him as QB1 over the summer because I thought he could build on some of the athletic tools that I saw and some of his the improvisation skills that I think he has outside the pocket. The problem was he just could not consistently get into rhythm, doesn't really have NFL tools and traits from a physical perspective. He's a smaller guy. Um, he just doesn't, it's all the criticisms that you would have of Ty Simpson, but at least Ty Simpson had a 9 game stretch where he looked like a really good quarterback. Klubnik never had that this year. So again, if this was, if he was pick 188, I would be fine. I would say, cool, get him in the room. He's a decent backup. But it really is, and I'm not going to act like trading day 3 capital is going to make or break a draft, but it's just sort of the principle of this was one of the flaws that I had with Muji last year and kind of still do. He just wound up taking players that I liked. He seems very dead set on it's his board, and he's gonna pick the players where he wants to pick them, and he doesn't care about like the market value. And we saw that with he's not the only GM that has this issue. I think part of drafting is you have to understand a player's market from a positional standpoint and from a just their perception around the league. And when you reach on players that are higher than where they are going to go, from a I don't want to say the C word, but consensus, like you have to be willing to accept, like, okay, if this doesn't pan out, I look like an idiot. And he's willing to accept that, fine. But this is the issue that we're all going to criticize. I don't think there's really any Jets fan that's like super thrilled with this pick. I'm sure some Jets fans are going to say this was a good pick because he was a former first round contender. I think those people probably didn't watch Clemson this year. Um, So we'll see. If he winds up being a backup quarterback, it's a fourth round pick. So like it's fine. I'm not going to sit here and say one fourth round pick is going to be like the detriment to this entire class. But I just think it demonstrates again that it was the same thing with taking Arian Smith in the fourth round last year. It's like you just don't have a proper valuation on some of these players, and you're reaching for guys that don't really deserve to be reached for in any capacity.
So, final question on this before we move to our next topic is this will tie into this here. When you look at this board and everything, how much are you just disappointed because I'm guessing you're looking at this going, this feels like a coach which you don't like. Aaron Glenn had more say in the picks than Mugray. So like if this is Mugray, I'm guessing you thought, okay, he'd be more take maybe more like an Arvell Reese. He'd go for more long term. Like, is this sort of the big thing for you where you're looking at this board going, this feels like they had the coaches had a big say and everybody was sort of in agreement. Let's go for this safer player rather than more of a long term player.
Yeah, I mean it's yeah, I don't know. I don't know how much Muji or how much input Muji had versus Glenn. I mean, I do think like D'Angelo Pons is a very, I mean, literally people compared him to Aaron Glenn. So like that feels like an Aaron Glenn, he wanted his guy. And that's fine. I've read too, like Frank Reich was a big Cade Klubnik fan, and like that was a quarterback that he wanted to get into the room. Um, Look, I'm never gonna criticize a GM for I don't want to say catering to their coach, but taking a coach's input and working that into draft picks and draft evaluation. You have to, if you don't take a player that your coach wants or vice versa, you're going to run into issues. That was the whole reason Frank Reich got ousted from Carolina because he wanted CJ Stroud instead of Bryce Young or Matt Rule. I mean, not Frank Reich. But he wanted CJ Stroud over Bryce Young. But point being, I I do think you kind of just have to coaches aren't evaluators for a reason. Like I will say too, Aaron Glenn is a former scout, so he has that going for him. But in general, coaches aren't evaluators. They don't they see the game differently than a scout and a personnel people see players and see putting a team together. And that's their job is to, understand how to get players to put together a team. So, I'm not going to be like, don't take a player just because Aaron Glenn says you want him, but it does concern me, and this is why I kind of said he should have been fired last year, is because now we're heading into a year where if Aaron Glenn does do well enough to keep his job, and I don't know what that bar is for Woody Johnson, but if Aaron Glenn is still the coach, by this time next year, we are entrusting him with the next decade of the franchise because we're taking the franchise quarterback with one of however the three first round picks are utilized. So I am very nervous. I still don't have any reason to believe, based on what I saw last year, that Aaron Glenn is going to take again, an Arch Manning, a Dante Moore, whoever it is, and take that and turn that into playoff success and maybe even an eventual Super Bowl run. Like that's the goal here. But I didn't see anything indicative of that kind of a result from Aaron Glenn last year. So he could easily prove me wrong if they go out and win. I mean, hell, even if they win like 7, 8 games, you know, but look competitive and the young guys come along and look good, I could buy in. But if they go 3-14 or 4-13 and are barely putting up any kind of offense, uh, he's got to go. There's no if or ands or buts about it.
All right. So this is going to be the one that everybody you mentioned before, the potential. You mentioned before, like sometimes risks. This was a risk, and for look, we leading up to the draft, you, me, Price Carter, Jim Wilkins of the NFL Draft Podcast, Bill Sparks, we're all going Jermond McCoy, 2024 tape. He is a first round top five cornerback. We have no idea what the health. And then the first round came and he fell. And then the second round came and, well, he fell. Then the third round came, he fell out. And we then start hearing, like, well, Jermond McCoy has not just like ACL damage that he had surgery for. Oh, by the way, he has degenerative, cartilage issues that, well, he might not, make it through his full 4 year contract. So for you, like, when you hear this, were you fine with the Raiders taking him with the first pick overall in the fourth round, or even you going, I don't know if I'll even draft him. Like I have no idea if he can stay healthy enough to be on the field for 4 years, let alone maybe a second contract.
Yeah, I mean, I was, as you said, we were all in the, if you're getting 2024 Jermond McCoy, you just got a top five pick at pick 101, 100 or 101, whatever it was. Um, I can't sit here and say like, oh, this was a massive steal because I don't have the medical information that 32 NFL teams have. There's a reason I was just reading Jeremy Fowler was reporting that he talked to 8 teams and 5 of them had Jermond McCoy off their board. So if if you're extrapolating that, that's more than half of the NFL. That's at least like 17, 18 teams that would have had Jermond McCoy not even on the board, let alone, taking him with the first pick on day three. Um, a fourth round pick to take a swing on a player as talented as Jermond McCoy, inherently, I'm gonna say like great. I'm gonna support that pick. This is also a team that desperately does need help at corner. So if they can get Jermond McCoy anything close to what Jermond McCoy was in 2024, they again got a steal at that spot. Um, I wouldn't be able to sit here and say like I would have confidently taken him there because I just don't know what the medical information is and is pointing to. I've heard he's got like, maybe he has a degenerative knee condition. I've heard that it's multiple issues in his knee. I don't know the ins and outs of it, but at the end of the day, like this is the kind of player that you take the swing on. On a day three pick, he's absolutely worth that. You're not getting more likely than not, you're not getting a starting corner on day three of the NFL draft. That's just usually not how that works. So obviously you can, but take the swing on an uber talented player like McCoy. Work with him, let him fully rehab if he has any sort of continuing issues in his knee from the ACL injury. Like let him just take all the time he needs to get 100% healthy, and then you can get him on the field and you can work with him. But I mean, again, if you would have told me that the Raiders are going to have both Fernando Mendoza and Jermond McCoy in the same draft class, I mean, you could easily wind up with, the best offensive and the best defensive player in this entire draft is like that's the ceiling of this. Like it's possible. So I don't have really any major issue with that pick.
Like, would you have done it if you were? Let's say I'm going to put Anthony Russo. You are, John Spytek is gone. Anthony Russo is the GM of the Raiders, and again, you have this information. Hey, 5 out of 8 GMs are going, we took him off our board. Hey, this guy hasn't played at all in 2024. Didn't work out of a combine. Did light stuff at his own pro day. Again, I mean, if you were the GM and somebody said this to you about McCoy and the doctor said, hey, yeah, he has this and this and this also wrong with his knee. It's not just the ACL. There's other stuff. I mean, would you waste draft capital on this or would you be the one going hard pass? No, Yes, I get it. He was great, but we're still wasting a fourth round pick on a guy who might never even play a full season.
I will say I would rather, I'd rather be a team like the Eagles, right? Or like the Ravens or one of these teams. Well, if I'd rather be a team that I know I don't really, I can find other ways to be successful at the cornerback position without him. Um, the Raiders, I can't confidently say that they're going to have a good secondary this season. So I would be a little more tentative as a like true rebuilding team to use even a day three pick, but that's still, it's early fourth round. That's still someone that can contribute and get on the field, pretty frequently, that you can get in that spot. So I I probably would still take him, if I get, if I had a medical expert or whatever tell me like, there's a good chance that he can get on the field and have a good career. Even if it was, I mean, if you're playing like, if it's the odds matchup with the general managers and it's like, well, 5 out of 8 took him off. So there's a 3-8 chance that he would be very good. I'll take the 3-8 chance at pick 100. I'm willing to do that. Um, but I do understand people again, like a team like like the Raiders, that you just need guys. You need more talent across the board on the entire roster. Um, so I get that perspective, but yeah, I would have taken the swing.
Let's go to the pick that you hate, some people love, but everybody's talking about no matter what. That's right. LA Rams drafted Ty Simpson with the 13th pick overall. And of course, NFL Twitter just went onto meltdown. There were people going, "This is a horrible pick. It's terrible. Why did they take him? They're made to win right away. They should have done this." Like everybody was, he got more hate than like a presidential pick. So I'm gonna let you start here because you were pounding the table going, "This is a mistake. Why do you hate this pick for the Rams at 13? And why are you anti Ty Simpson at the 13th pick overall for the Rams?"
So I listen. I'm not gonna criticize it from a fit and uh, a situational perspective. I honestly, Ty Simpson, from his point of view, this is awesome. This is this is a fantastic, pick on for him. He gets to sit behind an MVP and gets to learn. He's not going to play this entire year, barring some sort of crazy circumstance or an injury or something like that. But he's going to ride the bench and watch Matt Stafford go to work every day and just be a sponge and absorb and learn and hopefully get a little stronger and get a little bigger, um, for what's to come. But I just, I look at the Rams and I say, this is a team that was quite literally about maybe 3, 4 plays from a Super Bowl. And I would say winning a Super Bowl. I think they beat the Patriots if they're in the Super Bowl this past year. We'll never know. But I I look at that and I say, okay, you added Trent McDuffie. Great. Great addition. He's going to boost the secondary that needed a reliable number one corner. All for that trade that they did. And now you're in a position where you have this pick, the 13th pick in the draft, and you have, Devontae Adams, great player. He's not a spring chicken, and Puka Nakua is, going to rehab, and we'll see, what, I don't know if there's any long-term implications there. Um, but that is the thing that's happening. And then honestly, after that, the wide receiver room gets pretty barren. After those guys, I would say. So you look at that, and Kyle Lemons on the board, staring you in the face. He fits your offense, I think, very well. You're also looking at Casey Concepcion. Would have been a little early for me, but that I think that was an option. Uh, Denzel Boston, who wound up falling to 39 or whatever, I would have taken him at 13, but I guess the league didn't necessarily agree with that. But my point is, you had all these, and Kenyon Sadiq, you had all these weapons, these guys that are going to come in and elevate your passing attack. Even if you have both Puka and Devontae at 100%, and they're great, you could still you still I feel like need one more weapon. So all that said, I would have jumped at the opportunity to get one of those pass catchers, whoever it is. Um, and I just feel like the other way I look at it is, because people will say, "Oh, well, Ty Simpson, they were picking 13. They weren't going to be in a position next year to get a quarterback that is as, that wouldn't have they're not picking at 13 next year. They're picking at 20, 28 to 32 probably. So, you're not really in a position to be a part of this big draft, this big quarterback draft class next year. And, time will tell what the quarterback class is next year. But if I'm looking at it right now and I'm hedging my bet of what quarterback I could potentially get or maneuver the draft board to get from a 28 to 32 versus Ty Simpson that I got at 13, I really don't think there's that much of a disparity. I think you can get a very, very talented quarterback next year in the middle to back half of round one because I believe, and again, we were wrong about this class. It obviously didn't live up to the hype, but looking at it, I see a lot of talented quarterbacks that you can get next year for pretty equivalent draft capital. So to me, I just don't see Ty Simpson's long-term success being good enough to justify potentially passing on the final piece of a Super Bowl winning puzzle.
Let's talk about the elephant in the room. That is Matt Stafford is 37 years old. Last year at this time was dealing with an aggravated slip disc, had epidurals in his back because it was that painful. And granted, he is 37 and sometimes he can take a beating. So I'll throw this at you. If you were the Rams, and let's say you pass, you take Mekhi Lemon, are you confident that A, Stafford can hold up and not have more pain, which he's no longer a spring chicken. He is now probably a grandpa in the NFL quarterback, circles. And B, Stetson Bennett is your number two because Garoppolo's not there. So again, I get the hate, but is this more of like a smart, okay, let's hedge our bets. We get the quarterback of the future. As you said, he was great until Brent Venables figured out what, Oklahoma, what Alabama, had mistakes with their protection. And then once, monkey see, monkey do, and then everybody picked it up. And see, this is, hey, if things go bad, we at least have a young quarterback who can play a couple games. If Stafford has to sit because well, his back is basically being held up with spit, duct tape, and Jack Daniels.
Yeah, I mean that's fair. I don't think. Look, I think if Matt Stafford misses an extended period of any kind this season, the Super Bowl window probably closes. At least for the Matt Stafford, era of the Rams. Um, and I would say that with Ty Simpson, without Ty Simpson, I don't know what Stetson Bennett is at this point. Um, he's had his own off-field issues. It seems like the team is still invested in him to the point that he's potentially going to wind up being the QB2. He'll compete with Simpson, but I understand as somebody who I've said before that backup quarterback should be a priority for teams. We've seen too many examples of starters going down missing long stretches, if not entire seasons of, for their teams. And then teams are just completely, in shambles because of it. The Chiefs were playing freaking Chris Oludokun at quarterback this past year. Like they had nothing on offense, nothing without Patrick Mahomes. Um, so I completely get that. Again, I don't think Ty Simpson is a day one, on the field, productive starting quarterback. Like I would have, regardless of who would have taken him, I would have told you Ty Simpson should sit and learn for most, if not all of the season. And then we can talk about what he could potentially be down the road. But if the Rams are going to Ty Simpson or Stetson Bennett, I don't have particularly high expectations for them. But I do understand, if if you're like me and you think Ty Simpson would at the very least be a very good backup, if not a competent starter in the NFL, you get that guy. It's just, it would be very unfortunate to use the 13th pick to do that. Um, and again, we also just don't know like how the league viewed Ty Simpson as a whole. Would Arizona have traded back into round one to get him? Would he have fallen? Would I still don't think the Jets really were going to be interested at all, but I've heard like Cleveland might have been at 24. Yeah, I
Steelers
don't
might have
know.
been interested. I mean, there were enough
Sure.
teams that probably that you could go. Ty Simpson won't fall all the way to the Rams' second round. So
Hmm.
again, I get it. You want maybe the shiny wide receiver right away, but considering it's the Rams, considering they could still if they want, and we should just poo-poo this. They could still go out and get AJ Brown. They're that crazy that they'll go, yeah, we'll trade a 2028, first round pick for him, no problem, or 2027 first round. Here you go, we'll do it. So again, I get the hate, but if you were a Rams fan, how much do you just go like, yeah, we can't trust Stetson Bennett to be the backup quarterback. Let's get somebody in case Stafford misses like worst 2 or 3 games. We got somebody who can at least be, as you said, a serviceable starting quarterback.
Yeah, I mean, I have no expectations of Stetson Bennett at this point. Um, so I have to believe that at the very least, Ty Simpson is an upgrade in that regard. Um, I mean, and we'll see. Listen, the Eagles won a Super Bowl with a backup quarterback. You know, could I guess Ty Simpson get thrown in and be good enough on offense to get the job done if needed? Maybe. I just don't see that, and then I just don't also see really the long-term projection to justify that spot.
All right. Speaking of justifying, James Gladstone, the GM for the Jacksonville Jaguars. Well, let's see. There's agreeing with the consensus board. There's, hey, let's step out a bit and reach maybe for one or two. And then there's James Gladstone going, I'm just going to go by my board. And I don't care what you people say. And you, basically everybody that I talked to, Sparks, Wilkins, John Helmkamp basically looked at Jacksonville's board and went, "What the hell are they doing? We have no idea." It is a dog choosing the players. With their second round pick, they took a tight end who's mostly a blocking tight end, a bit older. With their third round pick, they took a defensive tackle who most people thought would be around by round five. With their fourth round pick, they took a safety most people thought, all right, he might go in six, and then they doubled down with another tight end with a sixth round pick. Yep, he basically said, "F your consensus board. I'm doing it my way." Your thoughts and what was your reaction when you were going? Wait, Nate Borkirker is a second round pick. Albert Regis a third round pick. Jalen Husky is the first safety you're taking. What's going on here? Like, Who's running this board?
I listen, man. I will say first off, I was banging the drum for Nate Berkshire to be a top 100 player for at least a few weeks now. So you better believe I popped off my couch when I saw him go to the Jags 56. Um, Look, I will, and I kind of just talked about it with Muji. I'm not gonna act like part of me doesn't respect the hell out of just being like, you know what, F it. I'm gonna trust my board and I'm gonna trust my process and my scouting team's process, and we're gonna do it our way. I respect it, and I you know I can empathize with it. But at the same token, again, like I said with Muji, you're gonna look really freaking stupid in a couple years if Nate Berkshire you know is still your tight end three, and Albert Regis is a rotational, not a starter, right? Because that third round guard, you're still hoping for a starter there. So, or sorry, defensive tackle, you're hoping for a starter or at least a key contributor at that spot. So if he's no more than a rotational piece, you're going to feel like not a great use of a third round pick. Um, Husky was not somebody that I would have taken top 100. I don't think it was as egregious as some of the other picks, that value, but uh, I would have addressed safety earlier probably. I thought this was a good safety group. And so walking away with Husky wouldn't have been my first option. Um, but like even if you go down the board, like CJ Williams was not in my top 300. Zach Durfee was not in my top 300. Parker Hughes, I didn't even watch Parker Hughes to be frank. Um, so I just feel like again, they honed in on their guys and they trusted their board and took these players. And again, that's fine, but you got to get contributors. You got to get your roster filled out, because this is the flaw of so many GMs is when you go back and look at their draft track records and you see just okay, well, none of these players are on the roster anymore. These players aren't on the roster anymore. None of these players are key contributors. And it's like, well, if you have 3 or 4 bad drafts, you're not sticking around much longer. And it did feel, I couldn't help but feel that James Gladstone was like drafting to prove people wrong, and that's a dangerous way to draft. Um, he's been a general manager literally for a year, and doesn't, have the credentials yet. I know the Jags just had a good year, and I'm not saying that they can't, continue to get better, but I don't know if I would have the gall and gumption to just, basically tell everybody around me, nah, you're all wrong. Watch this, and then, try to prove a point. Um, Time will tell with all of these picks. Uh, but I would be a little nervous if I was a Jags fan of what's to come.
Like right now, you could argue, hey, wait a minute here. He's the guy who had the brilliant idea of exchanging tons of draft capital, basically a future first round pick this year for a guy that, was nice, we could argue, in Travis Hunter, but he was a cornerback wide receiver. I mean, and look, there was even I was like, and I was a Travis Hunter fan and still am, but I was like, wait a minute here. 2 first round picks and extra draft capital just for a quarterback wide receiver. That's a little bit rich for my blood. And then you look here, it's like, okay, blocking tight end when you need maybe a safety or maybe could have gotten a guard or tackle higher up. Like, and again, I get it. The consensus board we can make fun of because it's like hive mind. Oh, do you like pizza? Yeah, I love pizza. Yeah, yeah, I kind of like pizza. We all love pizza, but again. I guess if this is like, when do you sort of, if you're James Gladstone, when do you go, I have a playoff team. Let me make some more conventional picks rather than swing for players where it's like, yeah, I like them, but they're not at maybe, what is valuable in terms of what you need to build an NFL team with.
Yeah, and look again, I was Nate Berkature was a my guy, so like I like him. Um, and
Would you have
I
taken him in the
believe
second round, though?
no, that was gonna be my point. Is I liked Nate Berkature more than I think everybody except James Gladstone, but I wouldn't have taken him at 56. I will say too, in a slight defense of Gladstone, uh, it wasn't just him that took a tight end way earlier than I thought. Like uh, what's it? Nate Will Kazmarek went like 20 something picks later. Um, Sam Rouge, who was another guy that I loved, but people had him outside the top 150. Marlon Klein went not long after Berkature. So like I I do feel like he's maybe getting a little overhated in that regard. Like other tight ends went on day two that were considerable reaches, in my opinion. He just happened to be first, and he just happened to be the most vocal about going against the consensus. So like I think that's why we're focusing on him a little bit. But yes, I would not have taken if he took Berkature in the third round to pick whatever Albert Regis was or Husky or like one of those picks. I would have been here more defending it more than I am. But 56 for a guy that you hope maybe could be developing into a starting tight end is it's risky business.
All right. Speaking of risky business, you, Bill Sparks, Dane Brugler, and a bunch of other people. Yes, we're all getting ready for 2027 NFL draft. It's not even, like within the next 3 months or 6 months or 9 months, but we're getting ready for it. So on at risk of sounding like people may go, he needs therapy. You need to, take some time here. How much have you been getting ready for your 2027 big board, and why are you, Sparks, Price Carter, you know, Nate New Weston, and even every NFL general manager looking at 2027 going, ooh, maybe we'll crack open a bottle and, have a good time here. Like, what is it about the 2027 class that people already are like going, it's going to be a great class?
Look, I learned from last year to not get overly caught up in I'll say hype machines, and the overwhelmingly, the overwhelming excitement that you're going to hear for the next, until the college football season starts, like for 4 months. But I will say, just purely on paper and from what I've watched 81 players up to this point for next year's draft, and I feel pretty confident to say that at almost, if not every single position, the best two or three players that you're going to get at each position are better than the ones that you had this year. And that's especially true for the premium positions. The quarterback group has a lot more promise than it did this time last year. And I know that last year's quarterback group let people down, let me down, and let all of us down. But I would have told you, and I'm telling you now, that this group of quarterbacks is better than the group of quarterbacks at this time a year ago. So there is a noticeable upgrade there. I think, left tackle. I've already got two left tackles in Trevor Gooseby at Texas and Jordan Seaton at now at LSU. He's from transferred from Colorado. They are better, I would say, considerably than any left tackle. Then I guess what Monroe Freeling, right, would be like the left tackle one from this year. Um, I think they're both considerably better in that regard. Not to mention other talented offensive linemen in this group. Um, there's going to be really good defensive linemen too. You've got like Leonard Moore is arguably the best cornerback prospect we've had in the last, in the last half decade at least. Might even be longer than that. I just think we are going to have a lot more excitement at the top of this draft. There's going to be a lot more star power, and there's going to be a lot more players that feel like they warrant going in the top, 10 to 15. Like this year, I think we were kind of starting to fish a bit for players. Like once we got to like pick like 9 to 12, it kind of felt like, okay, maybe these guys aren't, you know, ideal top 10 players, but they have to go here because that's how the draft board is this year. It's not going to feel that way next year. Next year, every player that goes in the top 10 is going to feel like this is a top 10 player in an NFL draft that can become a, all pro potential Hall of Fame kind of player.
So let's start with the big question. Who is the number one player in this? Let's say all the guys come out, the number one pick. Like, is it a quarterback? Is it an edge and Colin Simmons? Is it, a tackle? Like, who's the best player in terms of when you see the tape, when you're looking at this, you're going, he can start right away. He is ready. He's going to be great no matter what.
So I genuinely think there you could have a couple different answers to this. I do think the overwhelming, I shouldn't say overwhelming, the majority of people, and I'm putting myself in this category. I think most people are gonna say Jeremiah Smith at Ohio State, and it's gonna feel like the cliche answer, um, but there's reason for that. Um, there is also reason that he has been compared to Julio Jones, and I'm a little tentative on some of that, but I absolutely understand the thought process behind that comparison. I said it before. The dude is an alien. He's 6'3". He's 220 pounds. Uh, I believe he has 34-inch arms or at least 33-inch arms. And he, the way that he moves, he's fast for a player that's 220 pounds. He moves very well. He he's obviously now gotten the tutelage from Brian Hartline, who's now gone, but he's had now this year to learn, or 2 years, I should say, to learn with Brian Hartline, and you see it the way that he runs routes for how freakishly athletic and gifted he is physically. He's just so physically imposing as a player, and not to be that's not surprising because he's 6'3", 220, but the dude just can overpower pretty much any corner that's on him. He did run into problems when he faced Leonard Moore, the corner from Notre Dame, that I think some other people will say is the best player in the draft. Um, he did have some issues there. I mean, it was literally like, two titans going back and forth. Uh, and they didn't. I wish they had more reps together in that game, but I, I do feel like it's gonna be the if I think a quarterback goes first overall next year, but I think Jeremiah Smith, Leonard Moore, and I'll throw out, and then I think you have to say one of the edge rushers, Colin Smith out of Texas or Dylan Stewart out of South Carolina. I think Stewart has to get healthy, but if he does that, he's definitely in the conversation. One of those four will be the first non-quarterback off the board, and I expect Like I expect the Raiders to be picking high. I expect the Titans to be picking high. So I think like one of those teams that's probably going to be picking in the top five is going to get one of those players, and they are going to be thrilled to get that kind of caliber of player.
Before we let you go, we got to talk about the hot button topic right now in all of college and NFL football. That's Brendan Sorsby. As of now, he is entering treatment for a gambling addiction. We were at one point, I guess he was making thousands of bets, anywhere between 250 to $1 on just the next pitch in baseball. Forget about games. The next pitch in baseball. That's how bad it got. There's also reports he bet on his own team when he was in Cincinnati. He was supposed to be a top 15 pick coming into this 2027 draft, and now there's talk that you have no idea what his future is. Your thoughts first on Sorsby, and just is this like the biggest cautionary tale of don't scout the player until you know everything that's going on behind the scenes?
Yeah, I mean, look, this is why, this is why teams spend both, tons of time and tons of money on background checks and meeting these players, talking to their coaches, talking to family and friends, talking to the people that recruited them. And you've said like Sorsby has now been to three different schools. He was at Indiana, he was at Cincinnati, and then he would have been at Texas Tech. And so you have all of this history for this player, and and from what I understand, this is an issue that dates back to his early years at Indiana. Um, and so this is kind of why like the NFL teams, and also these college teams put in the work to find this stuff out. Um, Obviously, I just should say, I wish Sorsby the best, and I hope he gets the help that he needs. Um, and this is unfortunately this is I think a bigger problem than just Sorsby specifically. This feels this is a societal issue I think at this point. But just to keep it to the football, we'll see what happens. Texas Tech now has to kind of figure this out. I guess they'll go to Will Hammond, who's played for them a bit this past year when Baron Morton went out with injury. Um, and yeah, and this field teams are going to learn. Teams are going to learn a lesson from this. I expect the NCAA to come down very hard on this because this is again this is a problem that is being very talked about and is something that I don't think they are going to want any room to tolerate. For programs or college sports as a whole. I think they're gonna make a statement with this, and whether that is banning Sorsby altogether or if it's at least just keeping him out a year. I don't know, but and if it's punishing the programs too, we'll see what that's like. Um, but look, I think we're entering a new territory with this issue, and the NCAA is not they do not want to be on the wrong side of it. So that is something that programs will need to take into account, and I would also presume that there's going to be more stricter regulations in place for this kind of thing going forward because again they programs and the NCAA do not want to have to deal with an issue as big as this and as costly as this is now going to be for Texas Tech and for Brendan Sorsby.
Can he get drafted in the NFL? Let's say compensatory draft. Let's say it comes out. One, do you think he will? And two, here's the bigger question: does any team take him? I mean, the talent is there. That's not the issue. But as he said, the last quarterback we knew that had gambling issues was legendary Baltimore Colts quarterback Art Schlichter, who uh, his career was cut short. He went to prison. Like there was talk of Even like, all right, was he involved with, he was in charge of public indecency, gambling related theft, and I bet the NFL was always scared, like, oh shit, did he throw games? Did he do this? Well, we become like the WWE where hey, it's fake people. So again, the talent you can say Brandon Storm's been a talented quarterback, but if you're an NFL team with what you know right now, does he get drafted if he comes out in the compensatory draft?
Yeah, it's so interesting, and I don't know what the average listener knows about the supplemental draft. So just briefly, I will explain simply that basically all 32 teams will essentially bid on if a player enters the supplemental draft, all 32 teams will bid draft capital. So the Jets, for example, can say, we will give a third round pick to take Brendan Sorsby. And let's say no other team is willing to give up a third round pick. The Jets will get Brendan Sorsby in the supplemental draft, but then they will lose their third round pick in 2027. That's basically how the supplemental draft works. Um, so in the vein of the question of would anyone take him? Yeah, I get probably someone will throw a late day three pick. I just feel like, we were just talking about how great the 2027 draft is. Not teams don't want to give up capital in that draft. They don't want meaningful capital in that draft is very valuable. It's more valuable than it's been in quite a few years now. So I don't think teams are going to want to throw around that kind of, or too high value picks for a guy that, now has this issue that he's dealing with. And also, we're going to grade him as I think he was getting like day two grades anyway, as just a pure football player. Um, so, that's a whole thing. Um, in terms of whether or not I think he is in the supplemental draft, it's tough to say because I just don't. I'm sure he's speaking with attorneys and his if he I don't know if he has an agent, if he has other a circle of people around him that can kind of advise him on what his next steps are. And again, it's tough to know what exactly the punishment is going to be from the NCAA. But I would say that for me, just looking at it, and from what I understand about what he has eligibility wise, and what his college career I think is probably going to look like if he doesn't enter the draft, it might be his best option. It really might be. It might be just get out of college, get yourself right, like get yourself, get the help that you need, and fix yourself, on a personal level, and a in a mental state, get your head right, and then you can focus on the football. And if a team is willing to like, take you late, with a late pick or whatever, and then work with you and develop you, he can be like a project kind of quarterback in that regard. Um, I just don't know if teams like how eager teams are going to be to like deal with all of that, deal with the situation and put in all that work to, make something out of it. So it's a tough spot. The top priority for him though has to be just get yourself right before you do anything else.
Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Once again, we are always proud to have him on the show. I give you from a Draft Professors podcast and his own Substack. I give you it is none other than Anthony Russo. So, Anthony, before we let you go, where can fans check out your workout? Where is the X? Where is the Substack? Probably you have your own YouTube channel. Where can fans hit you up at?
So you can find me on X at Anthony underscore Russo 97. As we mentioned before, I'm already fairly deep in the 2027 draft. I putting the board together and watching the stars of tomorrow. So you can find me there, find my work there. You can find my Substack on my X page in my bio, where I have articles there, and I think the plan is going to be I'm going to start putting actual scouting reports on it. Um, Efforting kind of how to do that, but that's the plan. And yeah, you can find me on the Draft Professor podcast. I'll be doing summer scouting for them as well in the coming weeks. So you can find all my draft stuff across the board. The draft season never ends as far as I'm concerned. So
Anthony Russo, ladies and gentlemen, once again, always honor and pleasure to have you on the show. We come back. We got a lot more going on here. Only on it's last call. Last call at the alcohol. Only on the last call podcast.com.